Well, it's been a while, but it's time for another prediction video. I know stuff. Oh yeah, good morning, it's Uncle Lou here. That's right, it is me, Lustradamus, live on YouTube for you today. Happy Sunday. It's time for another prediction video. Up today, a game-by-game prediction for the Texas Longhorns 2025 college football season. Now, y'all know how these videos work. I've done a whole series of them. I've done 10 or 15 teams so far. We got about 20 or 30 more teams to do still. Leading up to the start of the season here, which is only about 5 weeks away. It's going to be here before we know it. So you can see I've got the schedule pulled up on the side of the screen over there. We're going to do it like we normally do. I'll go through this thing game by game. I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for every single week, not just an overall record, and we'll see what I think Texas is going to look like for the 2025 college football season. Now, before we get to the prediction, we'll wrap up 2024 for Texas, talk about who they lost, who's coming back, what their roster might look like this season, strengths, weaknesses, that kind of thing. And then we'll move into the prediction. Let's start with last season, 2024. A good season for Texas, their first year in the SEC, no doubt about it. They made their way to the SEC championship game after an 11-1 regular season. Their only loss coming at home to Georgia about the midpoint way of the season, a little bit later than the midpoint way of the season, October 19th. Middle of October, that game was. They lost at home to Georgia 30-15. Other than that, they ran the table. Now, to be fair, they had one of the easier schedules in the SEC. Now, there are not really any easy schedules when it comes to the SEC and the Big Ten, but in terms of difficulty, there were definitely lots of teams in the SEC with more difficult schedules than Texas. And, of course, the schedules are the same conference-wise in the SEC this season as they were last season. Home and away is just flipped. So last year, for example, Texas played Georgia at home. This year, they'll have to play Georgia on the road in Athens. Now, they did beat Michigan early in the year, which ended up looking like a pretty good win by the end of the year. Michigan did have a down year, going 7-5. But Texas handled business up there on the road, winning in Ann Arbor 31-12. Didn't seem intimidated, weren't overwhelmed by the crowd or the unfamiliar environment, which is important when you look at an early season matchup they have this year on the road in the Big Ten, which, of course, we'll get to in a second, their game at Ohio State. But they meet Michigan early in the year. Ran through their non-conference schedule, and then things started out well. They beat Mississippi State. They beat their rival Oklahoma, just a beatdown of Oklahoma, really 34-3. Then came that loss to Georgia. So losing right after the Oklahoma game at home against Georgia. They beat Vandy on the road. This was a close one, 27-24, right after Vandy had beaten Alabama. Then a bye week, they destroyed Florida at home, beat Arkansas on the road, Kentucky at home, and then they had the huge matchup at the end of the year on the road at Texas A&M. Huge for a couple of reasons. Number one, we finally got to see that rivalry rekindled, right? This game went away about 15 years ago when Texas A&M joined the SEC, but now that Texas is also in the SEC, we get to see this game again every single year. And it ended up being a lot on the line when that game was played. It's not talked about a lot, but had Texas A&M won that game at the end of the year last year against Texas, Texas A&M would have been in the SEC championship game. So not that they had a great year or whatever, but because of some losses that occurred late in the season to teams like Alabama and Ole Miss, Texas A&M had a shot to make the SEC championship game. Had they beaten Texas at home the last week of the season, they were unable to do it, coming up short. Texas got that win 17-7. Texas then went on, of course, to the SEC championship game where they lost for a second time to Georgia in overtime, this time 22-19. That was the game where Georgia starting quarterback Carson Beck got hurt at the end of the second quarter. Gunnar Stockton played the second half and led Georgia to a come-from-behind victory for the SEC championship. Texas coming up a little bit short. They did make the playoffs. Hosted Clemson in round one. They were able to beat them by a couple of scores, 38-24. A great game with Arizona State. Maybe the best game in all of the playoffs last year, that Texas-Arizona State game. Texas gets the win in double overtime, 39-31. And then, of course, losing in the semifinal round, the round of four to eventual national champion Ohio State. Lost that one 28-14. So that was Texas last year. Let's look ahead to this year. Of course, head coach Steve Sarkisian back as head coach in Austin of the Texas Longhorns. I think one of the best coaches in college football today. He's been recruiting at an elite level every single year since getting to Texas. Lots of big wins. They beat Alabama in the regular season a couple of weeks ago. They won the Big 12. Their last year in the Big 12. They made the playoffs a couple of years in a row. Last year, winning a couple of playoff games. They sort of seem like Ohio State before Ohio State won the Natty last year, right? You look at what Texas has done under Steve Sarkisian, and there's really nothing more for him to accomplish other than a national title. And it does kind of seem at this point, sort of like it seemed with Ohio State at this time last year, that it's no longer really a question of will Texas and Steve Sarkisian win a national title. But when will it happen? Will it happen this year? Will it happen next year? They seem to be poised to win a national title here at some point in the next few years. Like every team that recruits in the top 5, Texas lost a lot of talent off of last year's team. You're going to have early exits for the NFL draft. You're going to have key players that graduate and run out of eligibility. You're going to have backup players who are pretty good but decide to enter the portal. And all of those things happen to Texas this offseason, just like they happen to everybody with a stacked roster. Now, they do have several key returning players. Arch Manning, of course, taking over as the starting quarterback this year. Quinn Ewers off to the NFL. I thought overall a pretty disappointing career for Quinn Ewers. Not that he was a bad quarterback. He wasn't, and it's hard to find any Texas losses that you can just sort of solely place on Quinn Ewers specifically. He just never... I don't even know if it's kind of hard to describe. It seemed like he never really took it to that next level. He like if you want to put like quarterback play on a 1 to 10, he was a 7 or an 8 most of the time, but he it didn't seem like he ever had the ability to go to that 9 or a 10 when he needed it. Didn't really seem like he had the ability to sort of put the team on his shoulders and sort of drag them to a win. Again, not to crap on Quinn Ewers. I thought he was a pretty good quarterback, but I think Arch Manning's ceiling is higher than Quinn Ewers. He's obviously more mobile, so he gives Texas some sort of options there that maybe you didn't have with Quinn Ewers. And Arch Manning's a lightning rod type of player. There's still a lot of people around that just think he's not any good at all. That is purely his last name. That's why he had a high rating coming out of high school. That's why every team in the country wanted him. That's why everybody talks about him. That's why everybody thinks he's good, is purely because of his last name. And I'm not saying that doesn't contribute to some of the hype around Arch Manning, but I think Arch Manning's going to be a pretty good quarterback. And even though he's technically a first-year starter this year, he has multiple starts under his belt. Quinn Ewers suffered a couple of injuries over the last couple of years, and Arch Manning was sort of forced into action. I thought he played pretty well most of the time when he played. In addition to those starts, he played in a lot of other games, and not just second-half blowouts. Texas would put Arch Manning in at different points during different games, red zone situations, third downs, things like that. So while he is technically a first-year starter, he's got a lot of experience, which is going to be, I think, important when we talk about that Ohio State game coming up, because they've also got a first-year starter, but one with a lot less experience. But anyway, Arch Manning takes over at quarterback. Wisner's back at running back. They've got Anthony Hill, Colin Simmons, Trey Moore, Michael Taff, all back on the defensive side of the ball. Again, they lose a ton over there. It's like offensively. They lose almost all their wide receivers from last year, at least their top 3 or 4. But again, recruiting the top 5, they used the transfer portal well, right? You look at who they brought in this year. They brought in 4 or 5 defensive linemen from across the country. They brought in a defensive lineman from Syracuse, who I believe was an All-American last year, a defensive lineman from North Carolina, a defensive lineman from Purdue, a defensive lineman from Maryland. They bring in a tight end. They bring in a wide receiver. So they're sort of using the portal like most people think teams should use the portal, especially teams who recruit at an elite level, right? You don't need to turn your roster over every single year. You don't need to sign 50 transfers a year, right? You assess your roster at the end of the season. Okay, who'd we lose? Where are the potential weak points, or where are we sort of light in certain position rooms? And let's go fill holes through the portal, sort of the way NFL looks at free agency. And I think that's what Texas did here. Now, how many of these players will be a hit versus how many will be a miss? I think there's a couple of guys on there who are almost guaranteed hits. We'll talk about them. Here in a second. But Quinn Ewers is gone, like I mentioned. They do have to replace 4 starting offensive linemen. And I think that's probably the biggest question mark that I have about Texas heading into the season. And again, it's not a talent issue, because you look at the way they've recruited over the last 3 or 4 years, they've got all kinds of highly rated and sought after offensive lineman recruits on that roster, right? But if you've never seen people start, it's hard to be 100% confident. That goes for any player in any position on the field. But when you've got 4 new offensive linemen, this is a situation Georgia in the SEC is also facing this year. It doesn't really matter how talented each of those offensive linemen are or might be individually, right? Offensive line is judged as a unit. And an offensive line generally is only as good as its weakest link on that offensive line. So it is a question mark. Again, because they recruit so well, I think the chances of Texas's offensive line just being terrible are not very good. But will it be great? Will it be a top 5, a top 10 offensive line? There's no way to know that. Again, because of the 4 new starters, you have to put that as sort of a question mark for Texas heading into the season. Their 3 top pass catchers are gone. Like I mentioned, Golden, Helm, Isaiah Bond, they're also gone. They've got options at wide receiver, though. You remember Ryan Wingo? He's one of the highest-rated wide receivers coming out of high school a couple of years ago. He's back, year number 2 for him. DeAndre Moore Jr. and Mosley, who I mentioned they took out of the portal from Stanford. I think he was a freshman All-American last year at Stanford, 525 yards, 6 touchdowns at Stanford last year. Now, Stanford was terrible, and I get that. But again, you're talking about a freshman receiver last year with almost 600 yards and 6 touchdowns. He transfers into Austin. So again, they've got some options there. They've got some proven production, even though they are losing their 3 top pass catchers from last season. A couple of playmakers back on the defensive side of the ball, like I mentioned, Taff and McDonald in the secondary. They brought in 5 defensive line transfers. So it's going to be a sort of reworked defensive line for Texas. So to me, those are the question marks for Texas heading into the season. Arch Manning, how much of an improvement at the quarterback position, if any at all, will Arch Manning be over Quinn Ewers? And how well are the offensive and the defensive lines going to play and hold up over the course of the season, considering there are so many new faces there on both the offensive and the defensive line? Let's talk about some odds. Now, the odds don't necessarily mean anything, and they definitely don't guarantee anything, right? But it is a sort of a good judgment or a good baseline, I guess, on how people feel about a certain team heading into the season. Because again, these numbers fluctuate based on people that are willing to put money on their opinions, right? So these are people who have sort of put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, and it just gives you an idea of what the general public sort of feels about a team heading into a season. So when you look at Texas and their expected win total, now, this is a number that they put out based on a 12-game regular season, so it doesn't account for any potential conference title game, bowl game, playoff, nothing. It's just of their 12 regular season games, how many do you think Texas will win? They put a number out, and then people bet over or under that number, and that's what causes the number to go up or down. It's based on how people are betting. Right now, the betting number for Texas in terms of regular season wins is sitting at 9.5. I know you can't win 9.5 games. Again, this is a betting number. So if you're really high on Texas, you bet over 9.5 wins. In other words, you think Texas is going to go 10-2 or better. If you're not so high on Texas, maybe you think they take a step back. Maybe you're not a believer in Arch Manning, whatever the case, and you think they're going to win less than 9.5 games, you would bet under 9.5. You're basically betting that they're going to go 9-3, 8-4, 7-5, whatever. You get the idea. So their expected win total for this season, regular season, 12-game schedule, sits at 9.5. Now, when you talk about the SEC, again, they made the SEC championship game last year, 1 loss in the regular season. That was to Georgia. They then lost the SEC championship game to Georgia as well. Is Texas expected to make a return trip to the SEC championship game? Yeah, they're expected to, at least according to the betting numbers. Texas is the favorite right now to win the SEC at plus 260. Georgia right behind them at plus 340. Alabama at plus 390. And then a significant drop off, and you get to LSU at plus 800. So Texas, the betting favorite right now, not just to make the SEC championship game, but to win the SEC. Again, doesn't mean they will. This is just a general idea of how people feel about Texas heading into the season. What about winning it all? I talked about it at the beginning. It does feel to me like Texas is trending in that direction at some point. They feel to me a lot like Ohio State felt in 2021, 2022, 2023 before finally winning it all last year in 2024. And we have to remember, you can have some mistakes along the way now. This isn't the old days where you had to go 12-0 or maybe 11-1 to even have a chance to get into the postseason, whether it be a 4-team playoff or before that, the BCS National Championship game. Like we saw last year, a team like Ohio State has sort of some hiccups over the course of the season, doesn't really look like the best team in the country. They get to the end of the regular season at 10-2. They didn't even play for their conference championship, but they get hot at the right time at the end of the year and they run through the playoffs and win it all. Who's expected to do that this year? Well, Ohio State is the betting favorite at plus 500, but right behind them is Texas at plus 550. So Texas has the second best odds of any team in the country to win the national title in 2025. Georgia is behind them at plus 700. Penn State, fourth best odds at plus 750. So you got two SEC teams, two Big Ten teams there in terms of top four in the odds. If you're wondering who's next, it would be Clemson from the ACC at plus 1,000. So Texas, the second favorite, betting favorite, that is, to win the national title. All right, are they going to do it? Are they even going to make the playoffs? Are they going to make the SEC championship game? Can they beat Ohio State on the road early in the season? Can they beat Georgia on the road towards the end of the season? Can they beat Oklahoma again? Let's find out right now. I've got the schedule pulled up right here. I'm going to go through it game by game, give you a winner and a loser for every single week. All right, one of the biggest games of the offseason, probably the biggest game of week one, Texas on the road at Ohio State. These are two of the best coached teams in the country. These are two of the most talented teams in the country. And at the end of the year, I think these will be two of the best teams in the country. The loser of this game is not eliminated from anything, right? This is not a conference game. Ohio State could lose this game 100-0. Texas could lose this game 100-0. Either one of those two teams could go on to make and win their conference championship games, and they're guaranteed to get into playoffs. Even if they don't do that, they go 10-2 and don't win their conference, they could still get into the playoffs. So this is not an elimination game. I still think it's a huge game for perception purposes, sort of momentum to kind of slingshot one of these two teams into the season. Again, you're looking at two teams here who are starting brand new quarterbacks. Talked a lot about Arch Manning already and some of the experience he has. Julian Sayin at Ohio State, that's not the case. This guy doesn't have hardly any experience at all. In addition to that, Ohio State lost both their coordinators from last year, Chip Kelly on the offensive side and Jim Knowles on the defensive side. And I think that is a big deal for Ohio State. If you look at one of the reasons they sort of didn't win a national title prior to last season, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, they went through a couple of coordinators and they got Jim Knowles in there, and he sort of took their defense from a top 20-ish type of defense to a top 5. And that ended up being one of the main differences in Ohio State winning it all versus either not making the playoffs or getting eliminated in the playoffs. And anytime you're replacing both coordinators and you have a quarterback making his first ever start, fair number of question marks there. Like Texas, they lose a lot of talent off of last year's team, but they got a ton of talent back. They might have the two best players in college football, one on the offensive side of the ball, one on the defensive side of the ball. Caleb Downs, probably the best safety in the country. Jeremiah Smith, probably the best wide receiver in the country. Both of those players could wind up in New York for the Heisman ceremony. I think Jeremiah Smith is almost a lock to wind up there unless Julian Sayin ends up being a complete dud, in which case Jeremiah Smith just won't be able to put up the numbers needed to make a Heisman run. But he's clearly the best wide receiver in all of college football, and I think you can say the same for Caleb Downs at safety. On the other side of the ball, they lose both their starting running backs from last year. A lot of new at Ohio State. Now, it is a home game, which is a massive advantage for Ohio State, right? Number one, it's great to have your own home crowd. Number two, if you have a home game, it means you don't have to travel and deal with the other team's crowd. In Texas' case, Arch Manning, hostile environment on the road in Columbus. Now, while he didn't play last year on the road in Ann Arbor, a lot of these players on Texas' team did play last year in Ann Arbor, and they didn't seem phased at all. They went there and blew Michigan out. And let's not forget, that Michigan team went on to beat Ohio State last year, who ended up being the best team in the country and winning the national title. I don't think Texas is going to be intimidated here. They've played in the biggest environments in the country over the last few years, from on the road at Bama to conference championship games to hostile road environments like Michigan and like some SEC places they played last year, neutral site playoff games. They have played in every possible environment. I don't think it's going to be anything new or different for them to play at Ohio State. I'm not comparing Ohio State's home field advantage to any other teams or whatever. I know Ohio State's got a great home field advantage, and it's going to be tough for Texas to go in there. All offseason, I've been looking at this game, and I guess I'm just leaning towards the home team. It's just hard to find a clear advantage, I think, one team over the other. Both have new quarterbacks, both lost a lot to the draft. What it's starting to come down to for me here in this game is the fact that Ohio State has two brand new coordinators. If you look at Ohio State last year, they did not start off great. They, of course, lost to Oregon on the road. They nearly lost to Nebraska and probably should have lost to Nebraska at home. And even towards the end of the year, they lost to Michigan at home, and then they sort of flipped that switch in the postseason. I have a feeling Ohio State may suffer from some similar flaws this season, particularly because they have a first-year starter. You got to remember, last year, even though Will Howard was a first-year starter at Ohio State, that was a kid with a ton of Power 5 experience. He transferred to Ohio State from, I believe it was Kansas State. And they had you had Chip Kelly, you had Jim Knowles over there on the defensive side of the ball. All of that is gone. All of that is gone. You've got two brand new coordinators and a brand new starting quarterback. I think Texas goes in there and gets the win on the road at Columbus. I went back and forth on this 100 times. I'm not here to crap on Ohio State. They were the best team in the country last year, and they may very well be the best team in the country again in 2025 when the playoffs start in December. But like last year, I think it's going to take Ohio State some time to ramp up to what they could potentially be. Now, to be fair, you say some of those same things about Texas. Like Texas, too, maybe a team that gets a little better as the season goes along and Arch Manning gets some more experience under his belt. But the reality is right now, Arch Manning's got infinitely more playing time and experience than Julian Sayin does. They don't have new coordinators like Ohio State does, and I think this is going to be a great game. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game. I don't think this is going to be like a 45-40 type of deal. I think this is a game that struggles to get to the 20s. I think Texas goes on the road and gets the win. They're 1-0. Then they come back home for 3 straight non-con games, San Jose State, UTEP, and Sam Houston. I think they win all 3. And Texas is 4-0 heading into their first bye week. And this is where things get interesting here. Their next 2 games are at Florida and neutral site against Oklahoma. So neither of these are home games. I think they lose on the road at Florida. And before anybody jumps all over me, no, Billy Napier's not any good. He doesn't know what he's doing. I think DJ Lagway's a little overhyped. I think he's a good quarterback, but I think he's a little overhyped. I think Florida, if you look at Florida last year, they ended up getting a couple of wins late in the year that kind of no one saw coming at the beginning of the year. And they needed those sort of miracle wins late in the year to get to 7-5. When you look at Florida's schedule this year, it's sort of the opposite. A lot of their tough games come at the beginning of the year. Before this game is even played, Florida will already have played on the road at Miami and on the road at, I believe, Texas A&M. And I think they probably lose both of those. But they have a bye week just like Texas does here before this game. So both teams have 2 weeks to prepare. It's a home game. Billy Napier, it seems like he's constantly coaching for his job. It seems like Florida is going to get another one of those sort of big unexpected wins. Last year they beat Ole Miss and LSU late in the year. It seems like Florida's going to get one of those wins somewhere at some point during the season. I think it's right here. Maybe they catch Texas looking ahead to the Red River Shootout the following week. Maybe Arch Manning goes into the swamp and gets overwhelmed. Maybe Florida just ends up being a lot better than what most people think they're going to be. I think even people who are down on Florida probably think they're going to beat somebody that they're not supposed to, right? Why not Texas? It's a home game for Florida. I think Florida gets the win. That's Texas' first loss. They're sitting at 4-1. Good news is they're going to beat Oklahoma the following week in the Red River Shootout. I do think Oklahoma will be a lot better than they were last year. I don't think Texas is going to beat them 35-3 or whatever they did last year. I think it'll be a much more competitive game. I like the quarterback and the offensive coordinator that they brought in there. They're likely to be healthier than they were when this game was played last year, especially at the wide receiver position. I'm just going to be honest. I don't think Brent Venables is a very good head coach, and I would be surprised if he ever beats Sarkisian going forward. I just think that's a massive coaching mismatch there, especially coming out after coming off of a loss at Florida. I think Texas kind of regroup, sort of refocus, and I think they get the win in the Red River Shootout against a much improved versus last year Oklahoma team. On the road at Kentucky, to me, is the trickiest game on the schedule. I don't think they're very good. It comes after two tough games, though, at Florida and then the rivalry game against Oklahoma. Anytime you have to go on the road, it could be tricky. This seems a lot like last year's Vanderbilt game to me, which they nearly lost. They ended up winning by, was it 3, 27-24? I don't think Kentucky's good at all. I don't. But they weren't good last year, and they beat Ole Miss. Like, the better team doesn't always win. Like, that's kind of why we watch the games, because, if you knew who was going to win, it was just say, well, this team's better, they're going to win. You wouldn't have to watch any games. So I do think this is a potential, like, slip-up spot or trap game for Texas. But again, I think coaching gets them through. I think Texas wins on the road at Kentucky, still just the one loss at Florida. On the road at Mississippi State, they're going to be one of the worst teams in the SEC again. Outside of this being the second leg of a back-to-back home or back-to-back road swing here, it's hard for me to imagine any possible advantage for Mississippi State. I think Texas goes in there and gets the win. They come back home against Vandy. I think Vandy's a little overhyped because of sort of how good of a story they were last year. And that's what it was. It was a good story. Vandy was not a good team. They beat Alabama. And look, that's great. Alabama went in there, rolled the ball out, and thought they were going to win just because they showed up, and they didn't. And congratulations to Vandy for that. Diego Poverty played a great game, played several great games last year, and he's back at quarterback. And he'll have several other great games again this year. But Vandy's a 4 or 5 win team. And I don't think they're going into Austin and getting the win. I think Texas beats them. And then they have another bye week, and they come out of that. And were it not for the Oklahoma game, which is the biggest game of the year for Texas every single year, I think this would be the biggest game of the year for Texas. This was sort of the hurdle they couldn't get over last year in the SEC, losing not once but twice to Georgia. They lost at home to Georgia, and they lost in a neutral site to Georgia. They lost to Georgia's starting quarterback. They lost to Georgia's backup quarterback. The backup actually came in and led them to a come from behind victory over Texas in the SEC championship game. Now in their third game in 2 years against Georgia, they have to play on the road in Athens. Georgia's got the longest home winning streak in all of college football. They haven't lost a home game since 2019. And that's the only home game they've lost since 2016. They were undefeated at home in 17, 18, had the one loss in 19, and undefeated at home ever since then. Tough place to play. I think they lose. I think Georgia beats Texas at home. And no, I don't have Georgia going 12-0. I haven't done a Georgia prediction yet, but I have done an Alabama prediction. And I've got Alabama beating Georgia. So that's at least one Georgia loss. And stay tuned. The Georgia prediction video is coming soon. I don't think Georgia's going 11-1. But I do think they beat Texas. So if you're trying to keep up with what I'm doing on Georgia so far, I've got Georgia losing to Alabama early in the year and beating Texas at home late in the year. That's Texas' second loss. To come out of that, got to play Arkansas at home. Again, this is just a game Texas can't lose. I mean, it's just a talent. The talent discrepancy here is massive. The discrepancy in coaching, massive. Sam Pittman hanging on by a thread there. In Arkansas, people are starting to talk about what a nice guy he is, which is like the kiss of death in college football. I think Texas gets the win at home. And here with the Texas A&M game, boy, I went back and forth on this one just like I did the Ohio State and Texas game at the beginning of the year. I think Texas A&M is going to be a good team, good enough to make the SEC championship game. Problem is, they were good enough to make the SEC championship game last year almost. They came up one short, right, by losing this game. I think it could be a similar thing. I think it could come down to the winner of this game makes the SEC championship game and the loser doesn't. I know Texas. I know I've got Texas with the 2 losses already, but a 2-loss SEC team can make the conference championship game. Georgia last year had 2 SEC losses, still made the conference championship game and won the conference championship. I think Texas A&M and Texas could both have 2 losses here, maybe 3. Texas A&M plays Notre Dame. That could be a 3rd loss, but that's a non-con loss. But anyway, I think it could be a scenario here where this is like a play-in game for the SEC championship game. I like Mike Elko. You look what he did at Duke. And again, no one talks about what he did at Texas A&M last year. And not that they had some kind of all-time great season. They didn't. They had 4 losses like they always do. I get it. But heading into this game last year, they only had 2 SEC losses. Had they won, they'd have been in the SEC championship. And I think you're looking at a similar situation here. I'm going to give Texas the benefit of the doubt. I think they're more talented. I think they're slightly better coached, even though I do really like Mike Elko, and it's a home game for Texas. They were able to go on the road and win at College Station last year. Can't see them losing. Their first game against Texas A&M since in 15 years at home, since we started this rivalry back up. So I'm giving Texas the win there. That put Texas at 10-2. I've got them with a big win over Ohio State to start the season, a kind of surprising loss on the road at Florida, a win over their rival Oklahoma, a loss on the road at Georgia late in the year, and then a big win against Texas A&M in the last week of the regular season to finish at 10-2. Will that be good enough to get them into the SEC championship game? It's going to depend. Right now, I've got Alabama at 11-1 and making the SEC championship game with a win over Georgia in the regular season. I've got Texas here at 10-2 with a loss to Georgia. If Georgia finishes with 2 losses and Texas finishes with 2 losses, Georgia would get into the SEC championship game against Bama over Texas. Again, I don't want to get into a bunch of tiebreak scenarios because let's face it, these predictions aren't going to be 100% right anyway. But if my predictions were right, Georgia would have to have 3 losses in order for Texas to get into the SEC championship game. So again, we'll see if that happens when the season starts or when I do my Georgia prediction video. But I think Texas is one of the best teams in the country. I think at 10-2, Texas is going to have a chance to win the national title, whether they make the SEC championship game or not. A 10-2 Texas team is getting into the playoffs. They could be last year's Ohio State. 10-2 in the regular season, miss out on the SEC championship game, but get hot in December and January and win it all. It's very possible. Again, we saw that happen last year with Ohio State. Texas Longhorns, 10-2 in 2025. Let me know down below where you think I'm wrong, and have a good morning.